Hi everyone, thanks for joining me here for this artist talk. It's my first artist talk, so hope you'll be patient with me. The first, I want to talk about the title, Bacchantes, the Celebrants. Some folks asked me about it, and originally it referred to another series of paintings that I decided not to include in this body of work because I wanted more recent work. The title referred more literally to that series, which were portraits of a woman wearing grapes, and her face was green, and she was meant to literally be like a devotee of Bacchantes, the wine god. But I decided to keep the title despite not having those works in this show because I think it still broadly relates to the majority of my work in general, which is especially the word celebrants, so and also bacchanalian revelry in general, and the sort of nudge towards Greek mythology is pretty obviously present here, and although I'm not literally depicting Bacchus or wine gods, I think you'll see that there is a Dionysian thread that's present. Instead, I ended up focusing more on marine or aquatic or water world beings, and that emerged from this piece initially because my process is to find reference material and from disparate sources and collage it together and allow a narrative to take form that I try not to force too much control over. And while this was happening, I became interested in Mesopotamian sea gods, this Sumerian, Babylonian motifs in stone relief carvings depicting like mermen and other sort of sea creatures. And so that started to become the dominant theme, and I proceeded into these works, which were consciously bringing into materializing that world, which borrows from, as I just said, from like pre-Greco-Roman sources and also standard Greek mythology, and also just my own imaginative reconfiguring of those kind of source material, but also bringing like a pop sensibility or a comic book way of working. Even the idea of panels in a comic book or the reappearance of characters, so that characters that started as mythical characters, like this guy is a common merman that we'll see in Mesopotamian art. This was a sort of mutation of another one of those characters, but he started to reappear in what I think of as a comic book way, so that the characters develop and interact with each other in multiple scenarios. And yeah, there's also the trumpeter figure, who is not from as far back antiquity. I found out later, when I first started drawing her, I didn't know the source, and then I had to look on the internet backwards to find the photo I had seen quite a while before. And this is a figure that's on the top of one of the fine art school in England, and this represents the muse of music, and her name is Euterpe. So I didn't know that when I painted this or the other iteration of the same character. But she's playing the horn. I thought of her or him as a herald, and also it interacts quite easily with this painting in the back that you'll see here, which is older. That's called Enigma of Creation, and I've got a number of musicians there also playing wind instruments, and so that forms kind of a nice correspondence or synchronicity with the herald figure here. And I also like to mix time zones, so she's like a Greek muse, and is not an individual, but a transpersonal symbol, I guess. And whereas those musicians in that painting are real musicians. That's Ahmed Abdullah was a jazz trumpeter who played with the Sun Ra Orchestra, and below him is a classical Indian musician called Usted Bismillah Khan, and he's playing a reed instrument. And so I like mixing these different time zones, but also repurposing the trumpeter figure as like a universal herald figure, so that the jazz musician is a herald and an individual player. And yeah, and that transitions into the color blue that I became, I guess, fixated with, and some people noticed that reminded them of the blues, or jazz, which is rooted in the blues. And so the continuity of the not quite monochromatic but high focus on blue is a mood, and definitely in jazz that's a mood, kind of blue, that kind of thing. And also it's a formal interest in like less is more, and just staying in the how much play can you bring about with one color. But I like to break, as soon as I'm doing that, I like to break that rule a bit too. And there's still other colors happening. And these two, especially the one on the right, Procession of the Sea Gods, I took a lot of tips in making that from a lesser known French artist called Charles Filliger, who was associated with Gauguin, and it was called the Pont-Aven School, and he did a lot of paintings sort of, I think, in the Brittany area of sort of seascapes like that, and I kind of borrowed from his landscape quite a bit, and even his, I guess, like Fauvist kind of color sense, but I inserted my own characters into a landscape that was a bit of an homage to him. And yeah, let's see. And beside Enigma of Creation is the Language of the Birds, also a somewhat older work, but that I thought worked very naturally with the current series, again, because of the dominance of blue. Though I wasn't specifically thinking of the ocean as a setting, but it just happens to have a blue palette. And also there are, and this was mentioned in the write-up for the show, I think there is sort of a hybrid human-animal relationships happening. You could call it interspecies communication. So there's only one actually human figure there, the woman with the blue face, who is based on a photo of Diane de Prima, the beat poet, and in her younger days, and that is the one human figure there. The only other one that's sort of half human is the Thoth. That is the Egyptian Hermes. The name for that god, the Egyptian version of that god is Thoth, wearing the ibis mask in gold. That is Thoth, and Thoth is the god of writing and communication. So it's called Language of the Birds, and that was actually a phrase, I don't know how far back it goes, but quite a long time, that is used to mean Hermetic language, or language literally spoken from the birds, or nature to man, or the language of the mysteries. So, and I think it's fun oh, and one other point is that is taken from a film still from the Sun Ra movie called Space is the Place. And so that guy is probably one of the members of the Sun Ra Orchestra wearing the Thoth costume. So there's actually kind of two Sun Ra references in both those paintings, which I think is fun because Sun Ra was also into Afrofuturist sort of mythology and a similar kind of play with mythology that I've been talking about here. as far as I guess the way that these are painted, or the technique, some part of that was fun that people have come up and asked me about is the seeping, using the mineral spirits, which in oil painting, that's kind of like water is in watercolor. So by using a lot of mineral spirits and letting gravity do its thing, but also controlling it by delineating areas with a clean line of paint, you're able to have a tension between the materials doing their own thing and a sort of bit of a chaos with a certain amount of order to in counterpoint to that. And so most of the new ones have a fair bit of that seeping quality. Yeah. I guess lastly, I would say that also circles, as you can see, some of these works are in a circular format rather than a square or rectangle. Some of those are because I found them on the ground, so they're just found objects, and the format I don't choose exactly because I found it. And so that's fun for me to let chance be part of the equation, and it disrupts the, what can be a static, boring format of constantly having rectangles. And also, for me, circles are reminiscent of glyphs, medallions, or coins. This one I call lunar medallion. The moon is obviously circular, coins are circular, and so to me it's a medallion, which is also a mandala. And mandalas depict life in motion, rather than in the square format, or the rectangle tends to make things static in many ways, whereas the circle, you have to work within the formal constraints of the circle, but automatically things are going to start animating or turning. So it changes the way that you deal with the composition in a way that I find very interesting, yeah. I guess lastly, I touched on this on the write-up, and it was the part that I was most reticent sort of to follow up on, because, I don't know, I talked about art as a, it's not in that one, possibilities for social transformation that arise from artwork, both transpersonal, psychic, and social transformation. And yeah, I guess I was shied away from talking about that too much because it's a bit of a big claim but I think that it's at work underneath art production, or should be. And so I think that art has a healing capacity, and so when I make them, I'm working on whatever psychic terrain of my own that it is healing for, and we know that about art, but also more broadly, we hope that it can have that effect for others that get a chance to look at it. And that's also why when I said things not being static, like the circular format engenders motion, and also the seeping of the paint engenders non-static approach to perception. So more broadly, the whole way that I would like the art to be perceived is in a dynamic state of flux, and that for me can hint at possibilities of social transformation. I'm not going to tell you how, I just think that it brings that about in our way of perceiving. Thanks a lot. If anyone wants to ask me questions, go for it. Yeah.
I have a question for you. Is that a building on the hill in the back, and is it a reference to a real building, or it's just a space?
It is a reference to a building. I wanted it to look just Like a real building from our area here in the west, in like just the landscape of the west coast. Just some, whereas this seems like the past. I feel like a sailboat seems like now, and that building looks like it could just be somewhere that you could see from Fairfield or something like that.
I remember on a number of occasions when we were talking about some of these paintings earlier on, I think when you were working on that one, we touched on the idea of Atlantis sort of representing the subconsciousness buried in history, and whether or not it's a literal place that existed in time or not doesn't really matter, but as a symbol, the idea of seafaring people who are masters of, the expanse of the subconsciousness seems to have found its way into your paintings. I wonder if you could sort of elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, like I think I mentioned earlier that this one kind of kicked off the series, and so when I was working on that and we were talking about those themes, that was how those themes started to ferment into being conscious themes for the rest of the works. And yeah, for me this one was about the reemergence of old gods or old forces or older ways of seeing that are at odds with the sort of mundane, the malevolent world aspects of today's world, or just the concrete world. These are like nature spirits that are actually almost at war with the current world, but they're like, this is like a clarion call, like assemble the troops. So they're bursting forth from underneath. They're like subterranean, subconscious forces that are emergent, re-emergent. Does that, I'm not sure if that answers your whole question, but.
It does. Well, and then in this one too, I think the title is the Procession of the Sea Gods, or the.
Yeah, this one, yeah.
Okay. I mean, to me, what it feels like is it's not a militaristic procession. It's a procession of peace, but also it's serious.
Oh, I'm glad you bring that up. This one only somewhat has that warrior aspect that I was talking about, but that one, no. This one is, if anything, a little bit sad, but not in the sense of hopeless sad. But it's not a procession of just fun and joy. But I view them in this painting as refugees. But again, they're gods. But they're gods in a world that doesn't have use for them. So they're nomads. They're dispossessed refugees. And so they're leaving this land involuntarily. So in that way, it's a sad procession.
Erik, are they also responding to the call? Like
It's hard to say the exact links between all the panels because it's like a non-linear comic book. But yes, they're from the same story. But I myself don't know exactly what order the panels are in.
Well, it's interesting,
yes.
even just the way that the paintings are oriented, they do appear to be going, they're moving in this direction.
As do they. I'm going to go with tentative yes then, because exactly. So yeah, I mean, it takes a while for me to read my own narrative. So if they are connected to that, then yeah, that their need to move from wherever they went is. I think there's a part in the Lord of the Rings that's like that, where they're leaving Middle Earth, and it's sorrowful, but they must go.
Right.
So it's kind of the same thing.
I have two questions about symbolism. The first one is, one of the first things that drew my attention with these paintings was the guy smoking underwater. I just really love the dreamy quality of that.
Yeah.
So that seems, I love that. And then I noticed that there's a few characters holding a cigarette, so
Yeah.
smoking seems to be deeper, right? There's something about this smoking, and I'm wondering about your symbolic interpretation of it. And also, the second one is I love the gods dressed with that fish shirt,
Yes.
and I was wondering where that came from because I find it charming.
Thank you. Yeah, those are good. I'll try to respond to all three. The fish shirt was from a stone relief carving from the same like Mesopotamian, I think, carvings, which are like 2D relief stone carvings. But I made up that it was a shirt. I was filling in the blanks of the parts I didn't understand, but there were figures that seemed partly human that looked like they were wearing ridiculous fish costumes. So I just emphasized that by making it into a shirt. Yeah, the smoking underwater, you're one of the first to notice that, and it's like, it's funny. Yeah. But I think your other question was that it seems more than just casual that they're smoking, if I'm right. So yeah, I guess, I mean, in this case, I think it's funny. Well, both of them. That one is a minotaur. A minotaur smoking is funny. And again, it's disrupting time, how we view these figures in time, so that antiquity or classical mythology doesn't have to be all solemn, it can be funny. And also, but you know, smoking is a sacred activity, and so if these people are engaged in or part of ceremonial activity, then that fits too, that they would be smoking. Yeah.
If I may follow up on, because they're holding something, I noticed that these other characters where there's no one smoking there, one of them is holding a flower and the other one is holding an egg. So I'm wondering what that means to you.
I think that's, even though I said that one had some sad qualities, I think that's an element of joyful part of that procession, and it was painted right now during spring, or what do they call it, Beltane, so it's spring symbols.
New beginnings.
Egg, flowers, yeah.
Thank you.
Like to just comment on how, like, I really like that you brought up language of the birds, how that's kind of like a hermetic language going on, and that can be somewhat irreverent, and like you're kind of talking about just how can we have some control, but also just let the connections go, and that's kind of like a fundamental aspect of a hermetic process, like even you using words ferment, or like, you know, that's all that subterranean stuff, and this call to action, this bursting through.
Yeah.
And like everyone's kind of like, it's like this is joyful, but it's also uncomfortable, and it's a bit irreverent, but it's also powerful, and I just really enjoy all that. So.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was important to touch on the title of that one in particular, because it somewhat describes in one sentence the whole mode that I think I'm working in for all of the things. Yeah.
Yeah, and even you just believing that the process of art, like that's a part of making art. So you're reflecting that in your art too. So I just like the layers there.
All good?
Yeah. I have one more question.
Okay, yeah.
For your next series, is there maybe a color that's coming to you that might be guiding your next series? Is there a color emerging?
Not yet.
Not yet,
but
okay.
yeah. Let's see. Cool, well, unless anyone has any more questions, thanks a lot for coming to hear the talk.
Thank you for having me.